Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as cEDH. I am one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors. Back again this week. Missed last week, but I have returned. And today I'm joined by my co-host Matt, aka Null.
What's up?
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
How you doing?
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going?
And today we're going to be covering internal consistency in deck building, and I want to give a shout out to Cobblepot for giving us the idea for this episode. But yeah, before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode? Fill me in. I didn't get to share on last episode. So, what's going on? Everyone's locked in their houses.
Yep.
Yeah, for the first time in my life, my parents are proud that I'm staying inside all weekend.
Nice.
Yeah, dude,
Yeah.
I've been practicing for years.
I was gonna say, man, I haven't even noticed anything. Like, what's I've just everyone's getting all stir crazy. I'm like, man, yeah, this is great. Nothing's changed.
Yeah, I mean, I've been called socially distant in the past, so.
Dude, I crack a window and that's my interaction with the world for the day.
Yeah, you just get like one breath of fresh air. You close the window again. Nice.
Okay, we're good to go now.
You guys been doing anything magic? Any fun brews or playing arena, doing webcam magic?
I was jamming some vintage cube until that got put back in the vault with the dreams and the happiness.
I know, dude. Me and Matt, we got a draft together going in. That was fun.
We went 3-0. No, I'm just kidding. We didn't.
You lied.
On microphone, I've lied.
Yeah, so I've also done a fair amount of vintage cube drafting with. For a while, we were doing the just hangouts on the GitRog server where we'd like group draft vintage cube, and that was lots of fun. And then, yeah, as Morgan said, they took away that, and I've never been the same since. There's nothing to do now except do the work that I'm supposed to do and not procrastinate,
I do have to admit that joke was stolen straight from Loading Ready Run about vintage cube. That was not original.
Credit where it's due.
Wow.
We're getting the cease and desist from the command zone, and now Loading Ready Run. We're up to
most controversial cEDH podcast.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's jump into housekeeping. So in housekeeping, we have 2 new patrons. So big shoutouts to Alex.
And Max D.
And
you guys rock.
And on this note, I do just want to say, thank you to all the patrons who stuck with us. We know that for a lot of people, this may not be a great time in terms of income and spending money. And anyone who decreased or canceled their contributions, we totally understand that this is a pretty rough time for a lot of people. So thanks again to all of you. We
are certainly not like mandatory spending or spending that's in any way important in the overall health of your life in general. So
yeah. Exactly what Morgan said. So, moving on to new developments. We've got the Marchesa tournament, and Morgan, do you want to cover this one?
Sure. I guess I can cover it, and Reed can chime in when I miss anything. So there was a big online tournament over Cockatrice a couple weekends ago, and it tried out sort of a new format where instead of formal rounds, they just had like the ranked league bot running for about 6 hours, and people played games and they could stop when they wanted and then cut to top 16. And you were allowed to bring 3 decks rather than 1 and switch them out when you wanted. So that was it was interesting, and I think it was very successful in getting a lot more games happening and having way less downtime than a lot of other tournaments.
Yeah,
it's hard to have 90-minute rounds and your game can finish in like 10 minutes. So avoiding that was really cool.
Yeah, especially it fixed the issue of in previous tournaments when you were at a record where you weren't necessarily out of the running for top 16, but people started to quit anyway because they got discouraged, and it would mess up matchmaking, and they'd have to go back and remake pods and all that stuff, and would have to make like 3DH pods to make up for it and all that stuff. And that didn't really happen this time because of the more freeform stuff. So yeah, I think it went a lot more smoothly than it previously has.
Nice. What were the results? Because I was not familiar with this tournament. I just completely missed it.
So Astral took down the tournament once again for the second time in 3, I believe. Astral Codex, I think.
Nice.
Two
I think
and
the
3,
last
right?
3 Cockatrice tournaments. Yeah.
2 and 3 over the last 3 Cockatrice tournaments. So good shit to him. He was playing Oracle Hulk, as one would expect.
I'm shocked.
Wow. Yeah, I think Final Pod was actually sort of diverse, but like not really diverse.
There was a Nagila, there was
Kess, I believe. I think there was Nagila, Kess, Thrasios, Timna, and one other Oracle deck, but they were all Oracle decks.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
Also, it's worth noting that, like, because of the format, it could actually be that some of those other people in the finals had a Hulk deck that they wound up playing but didn't play in the finals. Or
yeah. And they figured that they'd have a better chance with another deck into a set of Hulk decks. Yeah, and for those of you who are wondering if any of us actually participated, yes, me and Morgan participated, as we typically do in Trice tournaments, I believe.
I try.
Yeah, we try to make it out. Actually, Morgan, I believe you helped sponsor the tournament as well, right?
I did, yes.
Good on you. Community building and all that good stuff.
Mostly because the prize money was being just like divided very awkwardly, and I went like, if I just donated a few extra dollars, this looks much more clean. And then it was much more clean.
I see. The perfectionism of trying to make sure that everything lines
it
up
was
correctly.
Like purely the aesthetics of how the prize money was distributed. That's it.
Yeah. So yeah, me and Morgan entered. We both brought basically the same core deck lists, I believe, for the most part. And it sounds incredibly like toxic and terrible, but we both ended up bringing 2 versions of Oracle Hulk and then Opus Thief with an Oracle finisher. So that was fun.
Nice. Glad you guys are contributing to meta diversity and
basically
and whatnot. Yeah.
And basically
keeping the format healthy.
So Morgan, I think how the results went for me is like how, I don't know if you've seen this image online before, but I'll try to explain it. Basically how the results went is you're like the guy that stepped on a rake and then it just hit you in the face. I'm the guy that did like a kickflip down a flight of stairs to land on a rake and hit me in the face.
Okay, I dispute that characterization. I didn't just step on that rake. So the
rake actively had it out for you.
Yeah, one of the games I lost to not a spite pact, but a pact from someone who didn't realize he couldn't pay for it.
A miscalculated
and
pact.
That felt pretty bad. Like, they countered my Underworld Breach after I cracked LED, and then died on their upkeep to their pact. And it did not feel good for either of us.
Damn.
Yeah, so...
Well, the next new development, it's currently ongoing, and that is the Ikoria / C20 spoilers. And yeah, those were, there's still a couple days left on the spoilers, so we're recording this
as of time
episode.
Of recording, yeah.
Yeah, as of time of recording. By the time you guys hear this, they'll be all out, and you'll be wondering why we haven't done a set review or discussed, some crazy meta buster card that has been announced. But just you wait. We'll be doing the C20 and Ikoria discussion in our next episode. Yeah, so if we're not discussing, I mean, we might throw in reference to some cards that have been announced, but yeah, don't be surprised if there's like glaring omissions. But yeah, moving on into the main topic of the episode, and again, that is internal consistency in deck building. So we'll kick things off with talking about disjoint between the game plan / win cons and commanders and what's going on there. So Morgan, I know you had some points you wanted to cover here.
Yeah, so this was a big one, particularly before Thassa's Oracle was printed, where I think the best way to illustrate this is with an example, which was Consult as a deck was not actually super easy to win with. Like, you needed either Labman or Jace, or like Labman and Cantrip or Jace, and then Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation. You were looking at 5 or 6 mana, often heavily colored, 2 or 3 cards. Like, it wasn't a super easy win con to pull off compared to, say, like even something like Scepter, where the mana requirements were just much lower.
A lot of the best console deck in the format was Cast, because you could really leverage that
you can double
as
console,
a 1 card win con.
insane.
Yeah.
But then so the point of it was you had just insanely high card quality because you dedicated 4 slots to having 2, A1, A2, B1, B2 combo where any combination of A's and B's won you the game. And then that left so much room for the rest of your deck to just be tutors, card draw value, mana, interaction. And then people would try and put Consult in Reanimator decks or Razaketh decks or something like that, where you are dedicating a whole bunch of slots to these other win conditions that then take away the selling point of the card quality provided by Consult. Another example was Najeela Hulk before Oracle, where Hulk packages were 10-ish cards. It's Najeela has these incredibly compact win cons, and then you're throwing that away by putting in 10 win con cards that you don't actually want to be running, but you need them to win. So
yeah, the subtitle of this episode might as well be, a long ago, the cEDH meta lived together in harmony.
Yeah.
And then everything changed when Thassa's Oracle attacked. A lot of the points we're making are a bit. It becomes a bit harder to make the same kind of argument about internal consistency issues when
Thassa's Oracle and Flash Hulk are so free now. And the other sort of place that this came up was decks that had 2 or more or less disjoint win cons. So this might be something like the Divergent Transformations decks, where they also had a backup that wasn't maybe their backup was Scepter or something like that, where you have 2 completely different sets of cards that don't work together, but each are run to win you the game. And how that can be good in terms of backup, but also how many slots are you dedicating to winning, and is it enabling new wins? Does it let you win through different hate? Does it force your opponents to respect different things?
But yeah, so when you're playing, when you're picking these win cons and you're adding a second win con, you're destroying the purpose of going into the win con in the first place. You're losing the advantage you get by going into Consult and gaining the slot efficiency if you're just putting in Reanimator pieces, like Morgan was saying.
Yeah, and I think similarly it can start from hate as well. You could decide that with this particular deck you're going to run this hate because it deals with the meta well. But what you could do is put yourself into too small of a corner and ultimately have to run either a win condition that's never feasible to pull off, or having your win condition running into your hate pieces too consistently.
And I do want to stress, obviously, that pretty much every topic we talk about, this isn't sort of an easy question to just blanket answer. Sometimes it is absolutely right to run multiple win cons, even though they don't play nicely together, or to run hate that interferes with your deck a little bit because it interferes with your opponents more and you can handle it. It's all about evaluating what it is you're getting and what it is you're giving up in all of these trade-offs.
Yeah, and one thing too is that we're talking about some of these win cons that are generally considered commander agnostic win cons. So consult can really be run in, almost any shell for as long as you're in blue and black, especially with Thassa's Oracle. Consult Doomsday is, barely any slots at all, and it's pretty efficient. But picking a win con that is synergistic with what your commander is trying to do can be quite important, right? So people have in the past, if they're, jamming Isochron Scepter Dramatic Reversal was in, for example, if we're looking at like Zur. Zur used to run Isorev and Aetherflux Reservoir for doing like Shimmer Storm stuff. Now, Consult lines and Doomsday lines have been toyed with in Zur in the past, but when you're really looking at, Isorev, jamming Isorev into a commander without an infinite mana outlet in the command zone is you really want to evaluate all of your options before you're doing that, right? Kenrith or Tasigur, Thrasios, it makes sense in those contexts, but outside of that, you really need to evaluate whether or not your win con strategy that you're going with and how you're designing your deck are aligned with what your commander is, asking you to do.
Yeah, like I guess like a good example is Kikar runs Isorev because it is an outlet, but it's not like Thrasios where you just win on the spot.
Okay, and so now we can get into more specific examples about card choices and how they might interfere with your deck and commander and your strategy specifically. So this typically comes up when people are, considering what hate pieces to run, because as a general rule of thumb, you're running any hate piece that doesn't actively interfere with your deck, you're going to just slam in. That's kind of a cEDH deck building rule of thumb. Oh, I'm not running Dorks, I'm going to run Curse Totem, right? But things can get a bit dicey when you're trying to make meta calls, when you're saying like, you know what, this hate piece hurts me a bit, but it hurts my opponents much more. So, I'm going to put it in because, as a meta call and these are the kind of situations where you really need to sit back and take a look and examine whether or not you need to prioritize internal consistency or, meta tech. So I think one of the very, very popular examples, and this was since the printing of Hushbringer, this card has been discussed a lot because it both shuts off Protean Hulk lines and then also interferes with Thassa's Oracle. Now, it's not a perfect hate piece in that it doesn't also just, shut off Consult generally. Because as we've discussed in previous episodes, Consult and Flash Hulk, form like the perfect kind of duo where they just escape the hate that each other that hits each other. So it's hard to ask that much of your hate pieces, but Hushbringer certainly does a good effort. Now the problem being is that because it's so broad and the narrow kind of win conditions that aren't Flash Hulk or Consult, it's likely to hit your own combos. So the question is like, are you going to run it if you're running a Dockside Teamer Sabretooth combo deck? Are you going to run it if you're, if you're trying to do like Reanimator stuff but you're not trying to do Consult? When do you want to run Hushbringer? You can also look at, Collector Oof and whatnot. But when do you want to run these cards to counteract the stuff that your opponents are doing?
Yeah, I think the example you brought up is a particularly good one because of the combo itself functions well at working around and the ideal circumstance working around your hate piece, like with Baron or Teamer Sabretooth, right? You're able to return your Hushbringer or your Collector Oofs to your hand, and like that's an advantage. But the timing's odd for sure because Dockside is great because you can play it, produce a lot of mana, and that mana can feed into creating the combo where Hushbringer and Collector Oof will get in the way of that, but that disadvantage is clearly mitigated based, cause like it's functionally mitigated.
So moving on to the next portion of this topic, we're going to be covering when is it acceptable to run cards that interfere with your deck. So, either your internal commander synergies, what your commander is asking you to do, or the, win con that you've chosen, or just, the kind of game plan that you're trying to go for. So the most common example we're going to see is, meta-specific hate. Notably, since the printing of cards like, Hushbringer and Collector Oof, these kinds of cards are really asking you to run in like, hate bears kind of decks. But you're, obviously with Collector Oof, you're running, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, so you're losing some there's some conflict there. And with Hushbringer, you might be running some ETBs or some graveyard effects, but it might be hurting your opponents more. So when is it appropriate to run these kinds of effects? Which of you guys who wants to kick things off with this?
Sure, I'll jump in here. I think it's important. First of all, you don't want to be shutting off. There's a few things to consider. First, how easy it is for you to get rid of a hate piece if it actually does shut off one of your wins, and then how likely it is to still be in play when you are trying to win. The longer your deck wants to take the game, the more likely you are to tolerate. The more likely it is that, I play Null Rod on turn 2 to slow everyone down, and then when I go to win on turn 8, it's probably already gone by then anyways. And then there's also sort of a question of which of your win cons is it shutting off. So, like an interesting case to sort of look at is in a deck like Opus Thief, which typically runs Yawgmoth's Will and often runs Mnemonic Betrayal. It was like a very reasonable choice to run Rest in Peace and Grafdigger's Cage, despite the fact that like Yawgmoth's Will turns were super real and like can often be set up to just make you win, chain some tutors, play some rituals, Yawgmoth's Will, do it all again. But now, the deck has Underworld Breach in it, and that card is actually like insanely strong, and in that deck, arguably even stronger than Yawgmoth's Will, just because of how the deck is running wheels, how not a real cost the exiling cards is, and the fact that you can play the same card multiple times. So, like, that the inclusion of Underworld Breach tilted the deck more towards wanting to play from its graveyard. And so, like, that very much reshifts the balance on whether or not you would want to actually be running a card like Rest in Peace or Grafdigger's Cage in the deck.
Yeah. Reed, you got something to say here?
Yeah, it's really this function of how much you really want to fit an effect into the deck versus how much it actually affects you, and how much I think it's really about like how much it affects your primary game plan, because like using the Opus Thief example, before Underworld Breach was printed, using your graveyard was sort of a secondary strategy for the deck and not really a primary strategy, or using graveyards in general, I guess, if we're counting Mnemonic Betrayal, which I guess we should because good card. But it wasn't really like the primary strategy or like a primary strategy of the deck where the primary strategy would just be you're drawing a bunch of cards and using your fast mana to eventually hit a win off of cards drawn, and you're sometimes utilizing graveyard, even though some cards are powerful for graveyard. Where like when Underworld Breach gets printed, it shifts it into a primary strategy, and now you don't really want to be messing with your primary strategy, even though like Grafdigger's Cage and Rip are so impressive and so good, because like you want to keep the primary strategy of your deck as intact as possible, and you like when you're working with hate pieces, you sort of want to be working with stuff that you can afford to play based on them shutting off like secondary and tertiary strategies in your deck rather than the primary stuff.
And it's also, I think it's worth it to acknowledge the difference between sort of shutting down and interfering. Like, as an example, in the 4-color Rashmi of old, back when it was still more scepter focused, the deck ran like you wanted to run Klasms to hate on the Tymnas and the Confidants,
like
and
very
Dark
green
deck.
heavy decks, yeah.
Very green heavy decks, and like you were still running the sort of best selection of dorks, which was certainly like those were not a nothing part of the Scepter game plan.
Yeah.
Particularly like you were running dorks that gave you a lot of colors.
Specifically like Bloom Tender with Scepter is the big one, right?
Yeah, Bloom Tender, and I mean even Birds.
Definitely.
To a lesser extent. And like those still very much died a Pyroclasm, but you weren't running, like it wasn't like you were, the deck was still running, a dozen mana rocks. So you were certainly interfering with Scepter if you wound up plasming your own dorks, but you weren't shutting it out.
Yeah.
And like that's the kind of
that's a pretty big one.
That's
great. That's a great example. One, because I mean, what would be a podcast without me mentioning either Gitrog, Godo, or Anafenza? Spoilers, I'm going to be probably mentioning all three. But so let's start things off with Gitrog.
We're just doing them in sequence here. I thought we were going to be spread out. Okay, all right. I'm buckled in.
Yeah, Gitrog, running Grafdigger's Cage. Grafdigger's Cage shuts off no core aspect of the combo, so or the value engines of the deck. So it's not really interfering with your primary game plan there. The only things it hits are Finale of Devastation and Green Sun Zenith. So it's not a perfect. It's not like it's a Curse Totem in a Kess deck with no activated abilities. It's not like the perfect aesthetically pleasing perfectly consistent hate piece, but it is effectively that. Whereas in the example with the Pyroclasm, you do need your dorks to advance your primary game plan of doing Scepter stuff. So there's that. Now Anafenza, so here second box we're going to tick. There's some cards that interfere with your primary combo, at least the way I built it. So the way I built it was as a Razaketh, standard Razaketh stuff going on. So Razaketh Reanimator, doing LED combos with Ewit, recurring stuff. We don't need to get into the details of the exact combo specifically, but notably there's an LED in there, and you're trying to cast multiple spells in this turn. In a turn. So why would I be running things like, Eidolon of Rhetoric, or, Collector Oof? Because these are hate pieces that actually interfere with your ability to win the game. Or at least on the surface they do. So the idea with the Anafenza deck was to be able to get rid of your hate pieces as you're winning the game by sacrificing them to Razaketh. And in my first build, I also included Null Rod and Stony Silence. Now those can't be sacrificed to Razaketh, but at the time, the meta I was kind of trying to target was very artifact focused. So even though I would have to go through extra steps to remove those pieces while trying to combo, so you require an extra dork to sacrifice to go find a Nature's Claim to destroy your own Stony Silence, you're still able to overcome that in the process of comboing. Now, as I've, moved along with the deck, I've removed those pieces because I just found the downside of, having to impede your combo and, making it so you can't combo nearly as fast if you're slamming these hate pieces to be not worth the trouble they cause. So those are some kinds of things that you need to consider, right? If you're trying to balance between, interfering with your own combo and hating the meta out more, it can get a bit dicey when you're hurting your primary game plan that much.
And that's sort of touched on another thing as well, that like the usefulness of a card in a specific meta is something that plays into the function of whether or not you can fit it into your deck. If it's like, if there is some tension, right? If there is some non-bow with stuff that's already in your deck, where like it's not just the value and the effectiveness of a card in a vacuum. It's, as we always say, it's relevant to the meta that you play in and your play style, right?
I think you can.
Which is like,
sorry, continue.
Yeah, I was just like, same thing as what Lyndon was saying about like having stuff that you can't sack to Razaketh in, because it's good in a specific meta, and then recognizing when it's no longer as good, and recognizing when you need to retool some of the stuff in your deck that wasn't on bow.
I think historically you can see that decks with like kind of innate strong card advantage can pull off internal inconsistencies the best. Like, I think if you went through the list, I would see probably the strongest decks being Thrasios decks that can pull off things like Curse Totem.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that was not specifically Curse Totem, but sort of that internal level of inconsistency carried over by just the fact that you could sort of brute force your way through it was kind of the basis for the man decks, right? Where it wasn't nearly as focused on the storm aspect of ad nauseum early, have the super low curve so you can always win off the Naz. It was like these slightly slower, heavier decks that were just running cards that were, really good. And then, you use Thrasios and Timon, you leverage them to power through the disadvantage and the internal inconsistency between running cards like Linvala or like even Humility was the extreme in your ad nauseum deck.
Yeah. And like, I actually think that's a great example of like decks that run ad naus on a high curve just because they can, as an example of like internal consistency when it works. Or like when you can make it work in a deck, right?
There's I mean, I'm gonna be a cliche again and bring it back to Gitrog, but if we're talking about internal like inconsistency and strategies, with ad naus curves,
I'm right with you on this one.
Yeah, there is some shit going on in Gitrog because you've got the modern versions are running Tainted Pact and Plunge into Darkness as for value.
As one does.
And as one does, they're running, in order to compensate for the potential exile, you're running 2 Titans. But of course, you're not going to not run Ad Nauseam, which was one of the most powerful cards in the format, right? So you're looking at the inconsistency of not having some high CMC hits off of Ad Nauseam, which is terrible, but bouncing that off with a generally low curve, risking exiling some cards with Plunge and Tainted Pact, but you're kind of banking on the fact that on average it's going to be a net positive. And then another good example in Gitrog too is how over time the deck has transitioned away from Null Rod and Collector. Some decks still run it, and it's really, as we've stressed before, meta dependent. But the generic lists have cut it because green is just so strong right now in terms of dorks, and people are running more dork-based decks than artifact-based decks. And as far as green decks go, you run more artifacts than most of their decks. You're running LED for value. You're running like Lotus Petal, all the fast mana you can.
Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, all that stuff.
Yeah, we can complete the list. But yeah, it's you're running everything you can. So compared to your standard Thrasios Tymna deck, who's running some of the good fast mana that you are, but not nearly as much, you're going to be hurting yourself more than you're hurting other people, your opponents. So unless you're going into the Sans Green meta game with Zers and Kesses running about, your Collector Roof and Null Rod are just not going to be worth running. So that kind of segues into our next point, which is stuff we've already been starting to talk about, which is anti-synergy. What level of anti-synergy is tolerable? And as that last example demonstrated, it fluctuates.
But I mean, even setting that aside, 2 10+ CMC cards in a Naz deck, that's a pretty high amount of anti-synergy, and that's arguably like not meta dependent, or not really meta dependent. So like that's not a bad illustration of
like the quality of the cards in the deck outweighing any potential anti-synergies.
Yeah. It really comes down
to not necessarily the quality, but the necessity to play a certain set of cards, as well as
it comes down to card evaluation, right? Like, and how do you properly evaluate whether or not a card is worth it, and what the quality of a card depending on the build arounds, right? So yeah, that's a subject for another podcast, and how to correctly evaluate, the precise point when you should be or shouldn't be running ad nauseum. I mean, maybe that's not a topic, for a podcast so much as it is like a philosophical question.
Well, I mean, so there's an easy answer to it, which is that if you're in black and you're in cEDH and you can be running ad nauseum, then you should. But there are levels of stuff to that underneath the initial answer.
What does can run even mean?
What if it's a Draco in my deck?
Black? Yes. Is there not already an ad nauseum in your deck? All right.
There needs to be a very, very compelling reason for you not
That's
to
my
run
one piece of advice.
Yeah. Don't break format rules and then just run ad nauseum.
Yeah, another good example, seeing as Lyndon broke the seal on shilling our own decks, was when I was building the Holland deck. I wanted to run it as a kind of anti-Hulk deck, which means that there's a Cage, Rest in Peace, and Containment Priest in there. And those all interfere with what we're trying to do to like varying degrees. Rest in Peace is actually not too bad, but a decent number of the green tutors are actually to play tutors. Things like Finale of Devastation, things like Chord, Green Suns, Neoform, Eldritch Evolution. So it was sort of tricky trying to decide, if I want to support this Grave Hate, how much am I willing, like, how many pieces that nombo with the Hulk Hate am I willing to run? Like, how much anti-synergy can this deck bear? And where I settled specifically, knowing I'd play against a lot of Hulks, was I was running the 3 hate pieces I described. And I'm still running Finale because it's an infinite win. I'm running Chord because the instant speed allows a lot of shenanigans. And I'm running Yisan because it's a 1-card win condition that doesn't need the commander. And I'm not running Neoform, Eldritch Evolution, or Green Sun Zenith, all of which could arguably earn themselves a slot in the deck. And like, I've had a lot of questions about that from other people who have played in different metas and gone like, why are we running these nombo cards? Why aren't we running these, like, Neoform's a great card, and so is Eldritch Evolution. Like, why aren't we running these? And, my answer has been, because I see enough Hulk that the Hulk Hate is better, but that is not everyone's answer.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of put a if we were to phrase the topic of this episode as a question, is it right to have internal inconsistency in your deck building? I think we'd all agree that the answer is yes, when it suits your deck the best. Like, it's hard to say that. It's hard to say to answer that question with a no.
Well, okay, so I wouldn't say it's right, but I would definitely say it's not wrong.
I'd say it's probably necessary in a lot of ways, because like, I think what a lot of people also forget is like, there's just a level of anti-synergy and non-boism that happens just from it being a singleton format inherently, right? Like, you can't consistently put in all the cards that you always want to be playing. Like, you can't just put in play sets of all your good stuff. So you have to find other cards that you can put into the deck, and just like, by the virtue of them not printing like 10 versions of Sylvan Library or whatever, you're going to have cards in a deck that don't necessarily align and sometimes come into direct opposition. And I think it's just a feature of the format that you have to deal with.
Yeah, it is. It is an interesting question. Like, what do people actually count as anti-synergy or noppos? Like, you could argue in anything where you have like a even remotely expensive commander, like let's say 4 CMC plus, Chain of Vapor is kind of a nombo. Like playing Chain of Vapor in Kess and then getting Kess bounced, it doesn't feel good at all.
Coincidentally, that's also why Curious Control is not on Chain of Vapor.
Yeah.
But because it really sucks to get a Vile Smash with a Curiosity bounced when you're trying to deal with somebody attempting to win the game.
Hullen wasn't on Chain of Vapor, and then I put it in because the whole Hullenless Allurin meme line really appealed to me. But
yeah, one thing before we kind of close out the topic that I wanted to discuss, or at least get a bit, we touched on it a bit earlier, but I want to explore it a bit more, is anti-synergy or inconsistency in not necessarily the win conditions or the hate, but just the generic cards or the way you're constructing the deck, outside of those the win conditions, like I said, compared to the strategy that your commander is asking of you. So, if I want to give an example that's, that no one is really doing, but let's say Godo, right? Because I said I'm going to touch on all three. If you're running a bunch of, of the red, Phyrexian Arena kind of effects. I mean, they're calling them Phyrexian Arenas is very generous. But like Outpost Siege, I think is the red one that Impulse draws.
So far removed from being a Phyrexian Arena.
Yeah. But if you're trying to play like a Godo, turbo stacks and value engines, you're not really doing the deck justice, right? There is discord in what the deck is asking you to do and the cards you're putting in. Now we can transfer this to a more real example.
Wait, sorry,
right?
Could you describe to me how you build Godo in a harmonious way?
Oh boy.
Morgan, don't ask, Godo, will be here all night.
Godo wants you to put on helmet. Godo wants you to count to 11. That's nice. Yeah. That's how you do it. You count to 11. And,
but isn't there sort of inherent disharmony between wanting to play Godo and also trying to play cEDH?
Isn't there like just inherent disharmony in playing non-mana sources in Godo? Just anything that doesn't produce mana.
Yeah, I'm gonna shelve all the things that I want to say in favor of us staying on topic. If we want to transfer this to a like a more real example, right? I don't want to say anything and like shit on people's decks. So I'm trying to tread lightly here. But there's some commanders. Let's say Zur like hard control. Like you can build Zur in a hard control kind of way, but his effect of putting in an enchantment from your deck is really, when a card like Necropotence exists, it's really, really asking you to try and win the game with by putting in such a powerful card, right? You could be fetching value engines endlessly and maybe, back to basics and just stalling the game out forever and not trying to win, or trying to win through, Consult and Doomsday is just really good. So, maybe this is, it's hard to make my point with Consult, Thassa's Oracle, Doomsday existing.
I have an example as well.
Because you can just slam that in valueengines.deck. But, before that was the case, you're taking damage from ad nauseum. As you don't have good creatures to defend yourself because you want to be attacking every turn with Zur to be fetching new enchantments. So it becomes there's a bit of anti-synergy if you're going down that front, and you're going to hurt your win percentages. I can't think of any like other super good examples off the top of my head, but it more has to do with subtle that aren't the examples that are all going to be constructed are like.
I've got another good one. I have a non-contrived example,
but they're subtle. They're subtle in reality. I think
an example in reality is Divergent, and the point is, you're really hurting your green color identity by not being able to run mana dorks, especially with Thrasios in the command zone. So it's
that's a really good example. Thanks, Matt, for the
so it's anti-synergistic.
Fucking waffling there.
The trade-off is you have 4 mana. I haven't even read that card in a while. A 4
mana, 1 card.
Yeah,
speed win card.
Yes, exactly. And which is obviously super powerful. And when that deck was playable, but yeah, point being, like, you're going against your own color identity as a trade-off.
Yeah, you're foregoing the biggest reason to go into those colors, right?
Honestly,
imagine running a black deck without tutors, or so many decks and commanders are just begging, to have black or green in their color identity, and be like, oh man, this would be a tier 1 deck if that was the case, and to kind of just forego that because of cute interactions is it can be hard to justify.
Honestly, I feel like we're kind of having trouble drawing lines because to a certain extent the lines have already been drawn, and so we're like trying to come up with examples that violate them, but nobody plays those decks because that's already been figured out.
It was more in that if you're just straight net decking and taking things that people have already done, for the most part, those things have already been ironed out. I think it more has to do with when you're trying to brew a deck or take a deck in a different direction, which I fully support. So I mean, you could look at I don't want to start too much drama or anything, but Yuriko, right? There is some debate between, do you want to be doing Yuriko, turbo ninjas, run every single ninja that can attack in and run, lots of turn spells, or run lots of big bombs and fatties and burn people out? Or do you want to just run a blue-black consult deck with Adnaz and Doomsday and, generically good cards, and just the bare minimum of ninjas that are actually, worth playing?
I mean, I want to play Fallen Shinobi because that card's just seems so much fun.
Yeah, it's because you've been playing too much Vintage Cube, Morgan.
I saw the card like once in Vintage Cube. I'm pretty sure I said I wanted to play that card literally when we did our Modern Horizons set review, and I still haven't.
That card is like.
Are we talking about cards that we want to play for Modern Horizons?
First 5 picks.
No, we're not.
Yes.
No, we were talking about ninjas.
I know. But I thought we were talking about cards that we want to play for Modern Horizons, because I still haven't found a deck that I get to play Ephemerate in. I just want to make that known, and I'm fully okay with people sending me DMs recommending me decks that I can play in cEDH with an Ephemerate in them.
Now I have to edit out this section. God.
Yeah. So with Yuriko, the colors, your commander is asking you to do one thing, and that's ninja synergy and big costed cards. But your colors are asking you to do something else, and I think that's generally what causes a lot of problems with Yuriko, and why there's been some drama and I mean, how do you put it? There's been some disagreement in the direction to build Yuriko between some people. So
I mean, I feel like that's because to an extent people are they want to use Yuriko to fill a niche that nothing else fills effectively. Like if there was a good blue-black consult commander, would people really be building consult Nas Yuriko, or would they just build that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. A lot of the problem, I think, comes to if you're trying to just be towing the line between being spicy and running interesting and novel decks versus just running the best version of a deck.
Well, and we go over this, like, this ground gets retread over so often, right? About like justifying a commander's existence versus playing the absolute optimized version of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like we've done an episode on this.
Yeah. Pretty much every anti-Hulk deck should just be a Hulk deck.
Yeah, all
Probably
of
be
that.
better.
Oh God, worst
Darkest
timeline.
timeline.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're getting a bit off track, so we can kind of wrap up this topic and move on to gut check and listener questions. Do you guys have any closing statements on internal consistency in deck building?
Don't be threatened by all our negative attitude in this particular topic. Like, we came to these conclusions mostly probably because we learned some lessons of deck building. Like, but that being said, like, there are absolutely strong anti-synergy avenues you can take with your deck building, and definitely try that.
Yeah, definitely don't have the sort of reflexive A is a nombo with B, therefore I cannot run both. That I think a lot of people very quickly, it's the most obvious reflexive response. And it's honestly probably right a substantial portion of the time, but there are times when it is wrong. And it's important to be on the lookout for those.
Okay. Well, I think it's time for everyone's favorite segment. Gut check.
Good chuck.
Gut check.
Well, we'll do better with the enthusiasm.
Yeah, we
next
have to
time.
pre-record some gut checks, like in the morning when we all drink coffee.
Yeah, let's get all freaking pumped up and
after post workout.
So
pre-workout, I don't know.
This week's gut check comes to us from Morgan. Morgan.
It comes courtesy of patron Drew Nasty. I've modified it a little bit. Actually, we'll double up. I'll give the unmodified.
Yeah, we don't
unmodified
support
versions.
censoring.
So, you can add one color to any single non-partner, non-5 color commander. Which one do you think is the best? And which one would you most want to play?
Blue Gitrog.
Gitrog, dude. God. You can do better than that.
So, I'm sort of peering into the future here a bit, just a tad. But I think, like, beforehand, we would have said Omnath Black, right?
Yeah.
For best. I'm not sure that's...
Have we answered this before? Have we done this before?
Because I feel like we covered this topic.
Yeah.
Or like we
we
touched
said
on
Omnath Black before on this.
Well, no, I posted
those
those pictures on in our Discord, and we had a discussion about them.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't think we've really deep dove into this.
Also,
we also did color switching, not color adding.
Yeah, right.
That was a listener question.
Yeah.
You could switch one color.
Okay.
So beforehand, I think we all would have said Omnath Black is like the best because for anybody that doesn't know, Omnath Locus of Mana Locus of
the Royal.
The Royal, that's the one. Is a food chain outlet in the command zone that doesn't require anything in the main deck, and if it had black, it would be absolutely the best food chain commander in existence because who needs white, basically. That being said, peering shortly into the future, there is a pair of commanders that was spoiled that also does sort of the same thing. So I'm not sure
not better.
It's a meaningful improvement anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, you get to keep red. That's the...
You do get to keep red. That is true.
Right, but if we ask this question in the future, then it'd be simply to add red or white to this new. Anyways, well, my answer is Elsha top plus black. Like, that'd be sweet.
Fair.
That does sound pretty gross.
Yeah. I feel like
is that what you think is best? Or
I think that's what I'd want to play.
Both.
I don't know if it'd be the best, or like the best. Wait, best in what point? Like best
like
of the
which card would be the most powerful?
Right.
Of the ones we're constructing this way, we'll say probably would be the most powerful overall as well. But
yeah, non-partner.
I think there's probably an argument for like Sisay plus blue or something like that.
I'm thinking that I'm struggling to come up with an answer in terms of what I think the best deck would be, but I have a feeling that it's just going to be a very strong value engine commander that, like, it might just be like Edric plus black or something like that, where you can just get an insane value engine in the command zone and then just run the best win cards.
Tygam plus black.
Oh, wait. Tygam plus black is pretty nuts. Baral plus black is also sort of nuts.
Tygam plus green, so you can do Flash Hulk. That's just like uncounterable.
I think Urza would also be pretty crazy with black.
It's uncounterable.
I mean, if you're losing without black, it's hard to assemble those.
Hey, we could do.
Oh yeah,
we could do Baral plus black, and then people could stop trying to build Yurikos and Adnos Cosmic deck.
Dude, Brawl plus black is actually just like the sickest Storm deck ever. By the way,
yeah, that sounds pretty
so cool.
Yeah, damn.
I just want to play the one. I think honestly, my best is probably Tygam plus black. That seems just so gross. But what I most want to play is Mizzix. Either plus black or plus green. I'd take either of them, and they both sound like so much fun.
Would be pretty fun.
So my historical answer for my favorite would have been Virals plus blue.
No.
Here's a hot take, dude. Vanifar plus white?
Unfortunately, the issue with that now is Virals doesn't actually do much to help out the whole Flash Hulk situation anymore, because Shuffle Hulk is dead. RIP.
I think I would be interested in like Yisan or Godo. Yisan or Godo plus blue.
My backup has always been, and it's spicy and it's not good, but it's hilarious, is Yisan plus black.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well.
And I've gone over this with Morgan before. And he hasn't seen the light, but it's so that you can play with Hex Parasite, and you can basically just modulate your verse counters to be whatever you want, whenever you want.
Okay, I'm not like against the idea. I'm just not convinced that it's better than the other.
But
options.
You get to do whatever you want, dude. Have you ever wanted to verse down from 4? Because I have.
I have. Can honestly say I've never wanted to verse down from 4.
I think if you properly build your deck, you don't want to.
And the problem is that if you, for lots of interaction, you need to go up to like Woodland Bellower to get back down to your lower verses for sure.
Also, Vanifar plus literally any of the other colors.
I think
nice.
Vanifar plus red is just like actually disgusting, right?
It makes the win like a lot easier. Well, actually, it doesn't. It also necessarily make it like super easy. But...
It makes it fairly easy, but it also gives you a bunch of haste enablers.
It gives you a bunch of haste enablers, and also like conscripts on 5 as either an untapper or like a combo piece.
Or Kiki bottom,
super nice, rather than having to do like Chakra Retriever nonsense. But I mean,
so you would want to play with this deck the most, yeah?
No, I'm still sticking with Mystics, but it would be a close second.
Because with red, you only need 2 creatures, right? You just need Vanifar plus 2 creatures, and then you win. Because you pod one of them up to an untapped.
We're going to work out lines on the fly.
Yeah, okay.
That was going on.
Gut check, off the cuff response. Don't think it out.
No.
Let's come up with the Vanifar lines in each card.
I think Yisan plus blue would be fun to play because it's just like your Yisan in mono green is already
you can kill the Drake at instant speed is the reason. Let's be honest here.
I mean,
gross.
I was just more thinking that it'd be fun to have like, I think Yisan would be like probably the closest thing to a hard control deck. Just like a draw go, waiting to respond to things in the format that we have.
If you're in blue, you can run Flash.
Got him there.
Dude, you can pot up to Spellseeker and get either piece.
I know. No, don't even put those heinous thoughts into my mind.
Yeah, I have to admit, Yisaning into Gildadrake and then untapping Yisaning into Spellseeker.
Reed, it's even worse than you think. It's your first verse. You double verse 3 into Fierce Empath and Spellseeker. Oh god.
What have we done?
Okay, let's move on to listener questions.
Wait. Is there a 4 that? Oh, there's not a 4 that makes them unable to interact, is there?
Oh, there is with the new one. Then looking into the future,
the
once
new
again,
Flash
the
one.
4
Oh, my
CMC
God.
blue Greta Bolsher. Oh my
The
god.
dream.
I mean, you could always just go into Glenalendra and
No,
have
but
counters.
there's an actual Grand Abolisher.
If only they were going to print a
The one
4
that gets everything
CNC
flat?
Grand Abolisher in blue. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it, guys? 2020
That'd be so
prediction.
convenient. Ah,
Okay,
So
listener.
did we just set a
questions.
record for the longest gut check?
Yeah.
Probably, man. That's like half the
what
episode.
about that one
already.
that Lyndon had to preface with like 5 minutes of context before he asked the question? That one might have been longer.
That one too.
Okay, so our first listener question comes to us from Drew Nasty as well. And his question is non-creature enchantment as commander. Which one?
I've got mine.
So we were discussing this listener question before the podcast started, so we could all come up with our answers.
I feel like the most obvious answer is Jeskai Ascendancy.
That doesn't even seem that great. I don't know.
That's a pretty good one.
I think
yeah.
It's not
like,
bad.
no,
No,
you
it
think
doesn't
about
seem
it
that
more and it
great,
gets
but
worse.
It's very obvious.
So the one I've got is Enigmatic Incarnation, which is basically Yisan in green, in blue as well, right? Like, right, guys? Right? Basically the same thing.
That only works in your end step once a turn. Heck yeah.
And you have to sacrifice an
Heck
enchantment.
yeah, my
yeah.
dude.
I mean, there's things you can do with that probably. I don't know. That was the first one that I thought of that was like, that's probably, you can probably do some spicy stuff
Okay.
with that.
Definitely the Chad Jeskai response isn't Jeskai Ascendancy. It's wild research.
That's a great one.
For those of you who don't know what it does, it is an enchantment that casts for 2 and a red, and it has 1 and a white. Search your library for an enchantment card and reveal that card. Put it into your hand, then discard a card at random from your hand, then shuffle your library. 1 and a blue, search your library for an instant card and reveal that card. Put it into your hand, then discard a card at random, then shuffle your library. So you can tutor enchantments and instants in Jeskai, but you're gambling.
Underworld Breach, anyway?
I was about to say
In
Underworld
mono
Breach,
red,
or the true chat option out of any of these is actually Mirror March.
Oh no.
Because it's a 1-card combo with any creature in your deck.
I feel like I'd also
just be lucky.
Yeah, exactly.
Bro. Just be lucky.
I definitely want to play
Dude,
with...
you get to play Clark's Thumb as a combo piece.
with Elder Mastery, and then you just get to get like all the pingers, like Keteric Parasite and Nexar, and like even things that just ping sort of more randomly. It's the aura +3/+3 in flying. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards, and it's in Grixis. Just nobody has hands.
Well, I'm gonna play Zer's Weirding
So
as my
you can
commander, because I find. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow, no.
Yeah. No, I think the real one is Cadaverous Bloom as the ultimate ad nauseum deck.
Okay, that seems
dope.
pretty dope.
Yeah, that's pretty sick. I was about to say you also have, so first of all, just like Necropotence, but also 1,000 Year
Yeah.
Storm and
1,000 Year Storm would be fun.
or Maelstrom Nexus.
Dude, Maelstrom Nexus is like, no, I don't think it's that good. Yeah, it's like better in
Yidris, but
Yidris,
way less
maybe, or it's worse.
Is it better?
It's
'Cause
worse, right?
only
It's way
one spell
worse.
a turn, right?
But it's 5 colors.
Oh, okay. Another one, I guess, seeing as
Humility,
we've already peered into the future a little bit, I would have so much fun playing Death's Oasis, which is whenever a non-token creature, it's white, black, green, Kesser Abzan. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a creature card with lesser converted mana cost than the creature that died from your graveyard to your hand, which is essentially the text on Scrap Trawler, but for creatures instead of
and you
artifacts.
also mill 2.
And you also mill 2, which means sort of quote-unquote neutral loops actually like dig you. And then it also has 1 sacrifice Death's Oasis. You gain life equal to the greatest converted mana cost among creatures you control, which is like pretty irrelevant. But still potentially has some, like, I could see it being, if you make infinite mana, you can gain infinite life, which could allow you to leverage that life total in some way.
Well, if you really want to look very far into the future, I think a 7 mana enchant creature that gave it +20/+20 might just be what is needed.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, because we were thinking about this for a bit, but not too long. I'm interested to see what if our listeners come up with something that we missed that's obviously insane or the most obvious answer. So if you come up with something that or you just want to yell at us for being stupid and missing, let us know on Discord, I guess. So our final listener question comes to us from Alton7. And Alton asks, what do you all think of Thrasios Bruce Tarl evolution deck? Do you think it could become a bigger part of the meta?
So this is like an interesting deck. It sort of came out of Blue Pod, and the deck's shifted to a few different angles. So I definitely like a lot of the things that it's trying to do. I'm just not super sold on I guess a lot of there's Kenrith exists as a card as much as I sort of hate that fact, and Thrasios and Tymna are enough better than Kenrith enough better than Kenrith and red cards that it's often not worth it to move 4-color decks into 5-color. I'm much less convinced that that's true with Thrasios and Bruce versus Kenrith and black cards. First, because Bruce is a lot worse than Tymna, and second, because black cards are a lot better than red ones. So, I'm definitely I like the idea of leaning into Breach, having a bit of a Opus Thief style thing going on, but a little bit more mid-rangey. But I'm just not sure that it fits together super well, in Thrasios Bruce Tarl specifically, and in non-blacks specifically, which is one of the hardest things to justify in cEDH, in my opinion, is just not playing black.
Yeah. That being said, though, I think Underworld Breach is kind of just gets slotted into all the Storm decks, but from a pure combo perspective, it actually is still a strong card if you think of it as just one part of your combo rather than it just values with the rest of your deck, which is why a mid-range Breach deck works.
Yeah, Breach is going to continue to spread and go in more decks and enable more shenanigans. That card's just so cool.
Now that I'm thinking about it, in terms of adding colors to commanders, what about Underworld Breach in the command zone with Zur and red? It'd be kind of spicy.
Didn't we already say that?
Maybe. Necro is still comparable in strength.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate truth is that you can't Necro, if Necro didn't have the exile clause, that would actually be insane. You just Necro, you keep 7, you discard, you Necro, instead of going for 30 and just dying if you don't win, you go for 15, and then you just keep a stacked 7, discard 12 cards, and then just next turn it's you guys have, first of all, I have a stacked hand of 7 cards, and second of all, if Zur's in play, I'm grabbing Breach, and then you
But
lose.
which non-creature enchantment would you add a color to and have as your commander? I would play Dimir Necropotence.
I'd play what's the something surveillance, the
Guys,
Dimir one that
it's blue-green survival of the
You're
fittest.
all wrong.
Sounds good.
You're all wrong. It's Orzhov Phyrexian Unlife.
Dude, imagine blue-green survival, but instead of green to activate, it's blue. No, that's much. That's the trade-off
honestly.
you have to make. I'm calling a rule. That is a trade-off you have to make. You'll take it? Yeah.
Oh,
take
how about Sterling Grove with red so that you can get Underworld Breach with it?
Everything just folds back to Underworld Breach.
Okay, wait, but what if Sterling Grove literally counted as a creature and you could use it with food chain?
Well, that wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, by our email intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/Into the North Podcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our long-suffering podcast editor Roadkill. The next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Goodbye.
Peaks.
Have a good one.